In the heart of Siberia, on the eastern slopes of the Urals, there is an ancient forest that has long fascinated anyone who dared to look at it. His trees were old and majestic, and various creatures were hiding among their branches. It was a world where nature reigned supreme and wild animals lived in harmony with their surroundings. Burinya, the mighty brown bear, was the king of this forest. He lived in his lair, a cozy cave hidden from human eyes. Every day, he explored his possessions, training young cubs that came to his territory from time to time with their mothers. Burinya considered it his duty to protect them and ensure harmony in the forest. However, the forest has been getting more and more noisy lately. People came to its territory, leaving behind traces of disasters and disturbing the peace of animals. Burinya felt growing anxiety, but did not want to blame people. He was convinced that many of them were just sincerely trying to understand nature and communicate with it. Meanwhile, in the city of Sverdlovsk, residents began to notice the regular appearance of strangers. As a rule, they were hunters, poachers, and just tourists eager for thrills. But this time they were joined by a group of police officers who decided to conduct an operation to protect the environment. The date, August 13, 2023, marked the beginning of a new, perhaps sad chapter, when Senior Lieutenant Alexei Ivanov, an experienced policeman with more than 20 years of experience, assembled a team to patrol the forest. He was accompanied by Second Lieutenant Sergei Petrenko, an ambitious young policeman, Senior Sergeant Olga Smirnova, who cared about her colleagues, and newcomer Vitaly Tikhonov, who dreamed of fame and adventure. After preparing the necessary equipment, the four set off into the forest, determined to complete their task. Alexei emphasized respect for nature. Remember that the forest is a home not only for us, but also for animals. We must protect it, not destroy it. Upon arriving at the scene, the group found an intersection of footprints where human activity was most noticeable. The open dumpsters, the stubs left, and the mess left no doubt that poachers were operating here. The police decided to split into two squads. Alexei and Olga went in one direction to check if anyone else was left in the forest, while Sergei and Vitaly stayed here to eliminate traces of poachers using the territory. At that moment, Burinya appeared at the edge of the forest, watching the people who invaded his house. His calmness no longer mattered. He didn't know who these people were or what they wanted from him. These unidentified creatures with their strange sounds and smells made him uneasy. He decided to get closer to find out what was going on. Sergei, wanting to show his bravery, brought Vitaly closer to the tracks. "Look at the prints. It looks like the tracks of a bear," he said, pointing to large footprints on the ground. "Are you sure it's not just the tracks of some other animal?" asked Vitaly, trying to hide his excitement. But Sergei, concentrating on his findings, did not notice how Burinya was looking at them. At that moment, Burinya, deciding that it was time to put aside this threat, began to slowly approach. The police did not even notice how a huge shadow cast them to the ground, transforming the familiar forest into an atmosphere of suspense. From that moment on, too much has been written about retribution and the hype of the city. The police were whispering among themselves, developing an action plan to avoid becoming a victim of wildlife. At that moment, when they were discussing how best to deal with the bear, Burinya, clenching his paws, broke out from behind a tree and let out a mighty roar that suddenly pierced people's hearts with horror. Alexei heard the screams from afar. When he and Olga heard the terrible sound, they immediately headed in the direction from which the screams were coming. When they approached, the sight was shocking. Vitaly, overwhelmed with fear, stood in place while Sergei, taking a baton, tried to persuade the bear to leave. "Don't come any closer," he shouted. But Burina, feeling defeated, was not going to retreat. The other two policemen, realizing that the situation was out of control, got scared and rushed back into the woods. In this chaos, the most terrible thing happened. Vitaly, in an attempt to protect his colleagues, rushed forward, thoughtlessly putting out his hand, and only then did he realize that their encounter with the wild nature was not just a meeting, but a vital moment that escaped from the guided conditions. The bear, sensing the threat, attacked him with incredible force. Alexei and Olga, finally seeing the horror, returned to their colleague. They tried to distract the bear, but Burina was already angry. Olga, wanting to save Vitaly, rushed to him screaming, but she also became a victim of misunderstanding. Worse, fear and panic gripped them. They began to disperse into the forest, but Burina, as the ancient spirit of the forest, the guardian of these territories, was faster and stronger. In less than a few moments, a real tragedy occurred. Vitaly, Alexei, and Olga could not understand what had happened until it was too late. Sergei, watching the picture from the side, realized the horror of what was happening. He did not immediately make a decision and soon became a target himself when Burina drew attention to him. The last shot from his pistol in the air, of course, was just an additional annoyance. Burina, realizing that his house was under threat again, responded angrily. A few moments later, when the forest was filled with silence again, Burina returned to his domain, leaving behind traces of silent pain. The forest, once full of life, has become a place of mourning. He felt the weight of loss on his shoulders. Although he was a predator by nature, he was not a serial killer. He had defended his lair, but the cost was too high. In Sverdlovsk, the news of the tragedy spread all over the city. People gathered information, and everyone could see the terrible events unfolding before their eyes. Reports of casualties in the ranks of the police, the struggle to comply with the law, and inappropriate interference sought to blame and tried to explain what had happened. Grief overwhelmed the city. Communities began to gather to discuss how to prevent such tragedies in the future. A peace forest was organized in memory of the dead policemen, which symbolized the importance of mutual understanding between man and nature. A lot has changed since the tragedy occurred. Local schools began to teach a course on ecology, which included respect for nature and its inhabitants. Children from the town led excursions into the forest, observing its inhabitants with love and respect, so that future generations would understand that the forest should not be perceived as a place for hunting or destruction. As for Burina, he was still wandering through the forest, knowing that his world was not the same as before. But in the midst of his sadness, he found a desire to move on, not forgetting those who gave their lives trying to keep the law. This story gave him a new understanding. Caution in dealing with humans and wildlife, the collision of which was not just a loss, but a lesson that will be passed down from generation to generation. In the picturesque expanses of Siberia, the autumn of the picture of the devastating crash slowly turned into a memory of life, of mutual understanding and the hope that one day people and bears would be able to coexist peacefully, keeping their hearts open to each other.